Welcome, beloved anointed ones. Every empire falls the same way, not when the masses rebel, but when one unexpected voice dares to break the silence. Last night, something happened that nobody saw coming, and trust me, even your enemies lost sleep over it. Someone, out of nowhere from a place you least expected, stood up for you. Not whispered, not hinted, but stood up like a tower in the middle of a storm, and the whole atmosphere flipped overnight. Here's the suspense. Studies in social psychology show that when even one person publicly challenges a lie, the power of group pressure collapses by almost 80%. That's not me making things up. That's research. One voice has the ability to dismantle an entire crowd of pretenders. So if you felt the earth shift last night, it wasn't paranoia. It was the mathematics of truth finally breaking the equation of lies. And here's where it gets funny. The same people who swore they'd never fold are now panicking like they accidentally left the stove on at 3 a.m. The same crowd that looked unshakable yesterday is suddenly scrambling for excuses today. Why? Because they weren't expecting anyone to have the guts to call them out. They were counting on silence to keep them safe. But then, boom. Somebody broke the spell. Chosen ones, understand this. What happened wasn't casual. That voice didn't just defend you. It cracked the glass ceiling of deception, and once glass is broken, it can never look flawless again. Last night wasn't a defense. It was a revolution disguised as one sentence. And today, the world looks completely different because of it. Number one, the defender was never supposed to exist. The one who stood up for you wasn't supposed to exist in their plan. For a long time, everything about your life had been designed to make you feel isolated, cut off, unheard, defenseless. The people who opposed you built their power on the assumption that nobody credible would ever speak up for you. They believed they had sealed every exit, silenced every potential ally, and left you surrounded by a wall of indifference. That's why last night hit so hard. It wasn't just about someone defending you. It was about the appearance of an unexpected force that broke the script they'd written for your life. What makes it even more powerful is that this person didn't come from your inner circle. They weren't rehearsed, pre-approved, or predictable. They were an anomaly, someone whose courage wasn't calculated, but born out of conviction. That's why the moment felt electric. Systems of manipulation are built to predict and control behavior, but they can't predict an authentic soul who moves from truth rather than fear. When such a person appears, it's like a glitch in the program. It throws everything off balance, and suddenly, all the plans, all the narratives, all the whisper campaigns start to crumble. You could feel the tension shift because everyone else in the room realized something at the same time. This wasn't supposed to happen. They could smear you, discredit you, or twist your story as long as nobody credible intervened. But one unexpected voice of support carries more weight than 1,000 rehearsed accusations. It's a ripple that becomes a wave because it exposes how fragile the whole structure was to begin with. This is why the moment felt bigger than you. It wasn't just a defense. It was the unraveling of a system that was built on your isolation. It revealed that even in places you didn't think anyone was paying attention, there were eyes watching, hearts waiting, and voices ready to rise when it mattered most. That's why last night shook the atmosphere. It showed that you weren't as alone as you were made to believe, and that your enemies weren't as invincible as they pretended. It was the kind of moment that changes everything going forward, because once one person breaks rank, others soon follow. Number two, their defense was not about you, it was about truth itself. You might think that person stood up for you, but what happened went far beyond personal loyalty. They stood up for truth itself. This is the part that most people miss. When a system of lies has been built around someone, it's not just about attacking the individual, it's about controlling the entire reality around them. By defending you, that person didn't just challenge an accusation, they challenged the entire environment of deception that had been carefully maintained. That's why it felt so powerful. It wasn't about friendship or pity or even bravery in the usual sense. It was about something deeper, a refusal to let falsehood dictate reality anymore. What makes this moment extraordinary is that defending truth costs more than defending a person. If someone stands up for you as an individual, it can still be explained away as favoritism or bias. But when someone stands up for what's right, no matter who is involved, they're exposing themselves to a much bigger backlash. They're putting their reputation, their credibility, and even their safety on the line, because they're no longer defending a person. They're defending principle. That's a kind of courage that can't be manufactured. It can't be bribed, coerced, or faked. The shift you felt in the room, in the atmosphere, in the energy last night, was the sound of a lie losing its grip. Lies have power only when everyone agrees, even silently, to uphold them. But the moment one credible person refuses to participate, the spell starts to break. It's like pulling the pin on a grenade, not because of the noise, but because everyone suddenly knows things won't stay the same. That one act of truth-telling begins to rewire the entire situation. This is why your enemies panicked, not because someone defended you, but because the lie they'd been hiding behind became unstable. When truth steps into the room, it demands everything else adjust to it. And once it's spoken, it can't be unsaid. That person's defense of you was actually a defense of something much larger, the right for reality to be seen as it is, rather than as it's been manipulated to appear. That's why everything flipped overnight. Truth, when it's finally spoken, always carries more weight than the silence that preceded it. Number 3. Overnight, you became untouchable. What made last night so significant wasn't just the words that were spoken. It was the shift of balance that followed. Up until that moment, your enemies thought they had you cornered. They believed their numbers, their noise, and their manipulation made you vulnerable. They mistook silence for weakness and thought that as long as nobody stood in your defense, you were fair game. But the second someone credible rose up for you, the entire balance of power flipped. It was no longer just you against them, it was them against truth, and that's a battle they can never win. This is the part people underestimate. It's not about having a crowd on your side. It only takes one undeniable voice to change how everyone perceives the situation. Before last night, they could push their narrative without challenge. After last night, they know they can't, because once someone has openly vouched for you, others are forced to think twice before blindly believing the lies. In that moment, your enemies lost control of the narrative, and without that control, their power started to crumble. The protection you gained wasn't in the words themselves, but in the ripple they created. That defense turned you into someone untouchable, not because people suddenly see you as perfect, but because attacking you now requires them to go against reason, truth, and credibility. Anyone who still tries to discredit you after last night exposes themselves as dishonest or corrupt. That's why it feels like a shield went up around you. It wasn't magic. It was the weight of credibility shifting in your favor. This is why everything feels different now. Your enemies are not just fighting you anymore. They're fighting against a voice that shattered their monopoly on the story. That's a fight they didn't prepare for, because they always counted on silence and compliance to keep you in check. Now every move they make is riskier, every word they say is scrutinized, and every action exposes them further. The moment someone spoke up for you, you stopped being an easy target. Overnight, you became a figure protected not by numbers, but by truth itself. And that kind of protection can't be bought, silenced, or undone. Number 4. Silence was the real weapon they used against you. Silence has always been one of the most effective tools of control. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't show up in records. It doesn't look like an attack from the outside. Yet it's more devastating than open aggression because it erases your story before it can even be heard. For years, that's what they relied on. Not necessarily to harm you openly, but to ensure that no one would validate your truth. They didn't need to keep you from speaking. They only needed to make sure nobody echoed you, and in that vacuum, your experience could be dismissed, distorted, or simply forgotten. That's how suppression works. It's not always loud. Most of the time, it's quiet and calculated. What happened when someone finally spoke up for you was more than an act of kindness. It was a rupture. That silence had been functioning like a seal on a container, holding everything in and keeping the narrative fixed. The moment a credible voice cracked that seal, everything hidden started to spill out. That's why it felt so shocking. The attack you could endure because it was visible. But the silence, the refusal to acknowledge, the constant turning away, was the part designed to break your spirit. It wasn't about punishing your actions. It was about erasing your reality. That's why one voice changes everything. When even a single person refuses to be complicit in silence, the structure holding the lie begins to collapse. It creates a shift where others who were too afraid to speak suddenly realize they're not alone. Courage becomes contagious. The story no longer rots in the dark. It becomes visible, undeniable, and harder to suppress. And once it's visible, it starts to demand accountability. This is the real reason they're panicking now. The attacks you survived were never their strongest weapon. Silence was. The moment it shattered, their strategy failed. They can't rely on the shadows anymore. They can't count on everyone turning away. And you're no longer standing in the dark by yourself. The weapon they depended on for years has been neutralized. And that's why everything feels so different now. The silence they thought would suffocate you became the very thing that exposed them once it broke. Number 5. Loyalty. From an unexpected source cuts the deepest. Loyalty from an unexpected source hits with a force that nothing else can match. When someone you've always counted on supports you, it's reassuring but predictable. Your enemies can anticipate it, dismiss it, even prepare for it. But when the defense comes from a place they never expected, it shakes the entire structure they've built. It exposes the cracks in their control because they've spent so long believing they had everyone positioned exactly where they wanted. They thought they knew who would speak, who would stay silent, and who would betray you. Last night proved them wrong. This kind of loyalty is powerful because it can't be manipulated or dismissed as bias. When someone from the other side, or someone completely neutral, risks their voice to defend you, it throws every assumption into chaos. It's no longer you and your predictable supporters against them. It's truth emerging from unexpected corners. And truth from an unexpected corner is always harder to discredit. It forces people to reconsider what they've been told, to question the narrative they've believed, and to see that maybe the story they've been fed about you isn't the whole story. That's why your enemies feel this so deeply. They didn't just lose a moment. They lost the illusion of control. Their power depended on predictability, on knowing who stands where. An unexpected act of loyalty is like moving a piece on the chessboard they didn't even know was in play. Suddenly their strategy collapses, not because of the strength of numbers, but because of the strength of surprise. They can't plan for it. They can't spin it fast enough, and they can't prevent the ripple it creates. This moment also reveals something important about you. Even when it felt like no one was watching, your integrity left an imprint. People you didn't even know were paying attention saw enough to step forward when it counted. That's not random. That's proof that your life spoke louder than the smear campaigns. And now that this unexpected loyalty has been revealed, others will find courage too. The whole board is shifting. Your enemies thought they had all the pieces. They just found out they don't even understand the game anymore. Number 6, they didn't just defend you, they exposed themselves. When someone steps forward to defend you in a hostile environment, it's not just an act of support, it's an act of exposure. By choosing to speak up for you, that person didn't just challenge the lies surrounding you. They put a target on their own back. It's one thing to quietly agree with you in private. It's something entirely different to take a public stand in a space where it's dangerous to do so. That's what made their action so powerful. It wasn't convenience. It wasn't optics. It was sacrifice. This is the part your enemies never expected. They assumed that fear would keep everyone in check. They banked on self-preservation being stronger than integrity. They believed that nobody would risk their own reputation, position, or safety just to defend you. So when someone actually did it, it sent shockwaves. It didn't just weaken their attack on you. It revealed how vulnerable their entire strategy is when confronted with courage. Fear loses its grip when someone refuses to be ruled by it. What makes this moment even more significant is that truth spoken under risk carries a different kind of weight. It's easy to dismiss someone who has nothing to lose. It's much harder to dismiss someone who stands to lose everything and still chooses to speak. That kind of truth can't be spun or downplayed. It's undeniable because it's backed by cost. It becomes a living proof that the narrative built against you was not only false, but fragile. By defending you, this person also exposed themselves to the same scrutiny, smears, and attacks you've been enduring. They aligned themselves with your fight, and in doing so, revealed the depth of their conviction. That's why it hit harder, because it wasn't just an act of support, it was a declaration of war against deception. And when truth is willing to risk destruction, it becomes unstoppable. It no longer cares about comfort or image. It exists to break chains. That's what happened last night. It wasn't just about you being defended. It was about a person standing so firmly on truth that they became a threat to the entire system trying to destroy you. That's the kind of courage that changes the course of everything. Number 7. What flipped wasn't just opinion. It was power dynamics. What changed last night wasn't just how people feel about you, it was how power moves around you. Up until that moment, your enemies thrived on controlling perception. They had the crowd, the narrative, and the illusion of credibility. It wasn't just about being louder, it was about being seen as the only voice worth listening to. That kind of control gives them power, because when everyone assumes their version of events is true, they can attack you without resistance. But the second someone credible stood up for you, that power cracked. It wasn't simply an opinion being challenged. It was an entire hierarchy of influence being disrupted. Now the people who once blindly supported them are looking twice, asking questions, hesitating before agreeing. Suspicion is spreading where certainty used to be. That's not a small thing. It's a tectonic shift. Public opinion can be fickle, but suspicion is a seed that grows. Once people realize they might have been misled, they begin to re-examine everything. They don't just doubt one claim, they start doubting the whole system of claims. Your enemies can still shout, but every word now lands differently. Every attack now triggers curiosity instead of automatic agreement. That's why this moment is permanent. Noise can win for a while, but credibility is what sustains power. And credibility, once lost, is nearly impossible to restore. The louder they get now, the more desperate they look. People can smell desperation, and it changes the energy of a room. The very tactics they use to control the narrative, smear campaigns, whispers, groupthink, are now backfiring, making them appear exactly as manipulative as they are. This is what real power looks like shifting. It's not about you suddenly becoming popular. It's about your enemies no longer being untouchable. Their narrative no longer automatically wins, and that changes the entire playing field. After last night, the question isn't just who's right. It's what else have we been wrong about? That's the beginning of their collapse. They may still have the crowd's volume, but you now have something far stronger, the crowd's doubt. And once doubt enters, blind loyalty ends. Number 8. Defense is rare because cowardice is common. For a long time, you probably wondered why nobody spoke up for you. It wasn't because you weren't worth defending. It wasn't because your story wasn't believable. It wasn't even because people didn't see what was happening. Most of them did. They watched, they heard, they knew. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. People often underestimate just how powerful fear is. Fear of losing status, fear of being targeted next, fear of standing alone. These things keep mouths shut and eyes averted. Cowardice isn't always loud. Most of the time, it's just a quiet agreement to do nothing. That's why what happened last night was so significant. It broke a pattern that had been running for years. When one person steps out of the crowd and chooses truth over safety, it changes everything. Suddenly, silence no longer feels like protection. It starts to feel like complicity. Others begin to realize that the thing they've been avoiding isn't as unshakable as they thought. That's how empires of deception fall, not by mass uprisings first, but by a single act of defiance that makes everyone else rethink their compliance. The person who defended you wasn't braver because they didn't feel fear. They were braver because they acted despite it. That's a level of courage that exposes cowardice for what it is, a choice. And once cowardice is exposed as a choice, it loses its moral cover. People can no longer hide behind the excuse of, "I didn't know," or "I couldn't do anything." They see in real time that it only takes one voice to shift an entire atmosphere. This is why that one defense felt so big. It wasn't just support, it was proof that all along someone could have spoken, but chose not to. It revealed how fragile the silence around you really was. And once silence is revealed as fragility, not strength, the fear holding everyone else back begins to dissolve. Last night showed that cowardice may be common, but it isn't stronger than truth. One person's refusal to bow to fear is enough to collapse the illusion of invincibility, and once the illusion is gone, the empire built on it starts to fall. Number 9. Your enemies were exposed by their reactions. What gave everything away wasn't the defense itself, but the reaction it provoked. The people who've been working against you weren't truly rattled by the words that were spoken. They've heard words like that before in private. What enraged them was the audacity of someone saying it out loud in a space they thought they controlled. Their anger wasn't rooted in disagreement. It was rooted in exposure. They were never afraid of truth existing. They were afraid of truth becoming public. This is the telltale sign of deception. When someone is confident in the truth, they welcome scrutiny. They don't panic when questioned. They don't melt down when someone speaks. But when someone's power is built on silence, secrecy, and manipulation, even a single act of open defiance feels like a direct attack. It's not just about information being shared. It's about the loss of control over who gets to frame that information. By speaking out, the person who defended you didn't just contradict your enemies. They stripped them of the cover that silence gave them. Their fury is proof of the strategy they've been using all along. They depended on keeping everything unspoken, because silence lets lies breathe. It allows doubt to work in the shadows. But the second someone credible breaks that silence, the whole dynamic changes. Lies that are forced into the open start to suffocate under their own weight. The very intensity of their reaction exposed how fragile their position really is. And here's the shift. Once people see that fragility, they start questioning everything else. They begin to wonder why someone who claims to hold the truth would respond with rage instead of clarity. They start noticing contradictions, inconsistencies, and tactics they'd ignored before. The anger your enemies showed last night wasn't power. It was panic. They know that once one person dares to speak, others will follow. They know the shield they've been hiding behind, silence, has cracks now. And once silence breaks, the truth they've been hiding from can no longer be managed, no matter how loud they shout. Their reaction didn't just reveal their fear. It revealed the very weapon they were using to keep you down. Number 10. The defender spoke to the room, not just the accusers. What made that moment so powerful wasn't just that someone defended you, it was the way they did it. They didn't aim their words only at the people accusing you. They spoke to the entire room, the onlookers, the silent participants, the undecided minds. In doing so, they shifted the space from a private attack into a public reckoning. That's the real reason everything flipped so quickly. When truth is spoken in front of witnesses, it stops being a dispute and becomes evidence. Once evidence exists, the secret can't stay hidden. This is what your enemies never wanted. They didn't just rely on their accusations, they relied on the audience staying passive. As long as no one was directly addressed, bystanders could pretend they didn't see what was happening. They could watch, stay neutral, and convince themselves it wasn't their problem. But when the defender spoke up to everyone at once, they shattered that comfortable distance. They forced every silent observer to become a participant, either in upholding the lie or in recognizing the truth. That's why the air in the room shifted. It wasn't just a defense. It was a line being drawn in front of everyone. Once witnesses are created, everything changes. Secrets thrive in closed spaces, whispered accusations, and one-on-one manipulations. They die the moment they're dragged into the open where multiple eyes and ears can hold them accountable. The defender didn't just give you support, they created a record, a moment people can't unhear or unsee. Now those who stood by silently are carrying that moment inside them. They may not speak yet, but they've seen enough to think differently. That's why the flip felt instant. Your enemies no longer have a private arena to control. They're no longer managing just you. They're managing a room full of witnesses, each one now a potential truth-bearer. And the more they try to spin or suppress what happened, the more obvious it becomes. The secret isn't a secret anymore. It's a public reality, and that's the one thing deception can't survive. By addressing the room, not just the accusers, the defender didn't simply shield you. They shifted the battle from hidden to visible, from controlled to uncontrollable. That's why the game changed overnight. Number 11. You just became a case. Too dangerous to touch. What happened the moment someone credible stood up for you is more than just moral support. It fundamentally altered the risk involved in coming after you. Before last night, your enemies felt bold because they thought you were isolated. They believed they could attack you with impunity, twist the story, and face no serious pushback. But when a respected, undeniable voice publicly vouches for you, the entire calculus changes. Touching you now means they're not only attacking you, they're directly challenging someone with influence, reputation, or authority. That's a fight they're not ready for. Predators thrive when they think their targets are alone. It's easy to smear, sabotage, or intimidate someone who seems unsupported. But they hate losing control over the narrative. They hate the risk of backlash. Suddenly, you're not just a name they can drag through the mud. You're a figure tied to credibility, conscience, and an audience that's paying attention. Every move against you now carries a cost, reputational, social, or even legal. They don't like odds where the consequences land on them instead of you. This is what makes you too dangerous to touch. It's not that you've become untouchable by nature, it's that the risk of harming you has become bigger than the reward. They'd have to risk exposing their tactics, their hypocrisy, and their alliances just to keep targeting you. And once people with real standing have put themselves on your side, those risks multiply. Anyone who comes at you now looks like a bully picking a fight in front of a crowd. That destroys the illusion they've tried to maintain for so long. This moment marks a turning point. Before, you were an isolated story they could control. Now you're a public case they have to navigate carefully. That means hesitation, second-guessing, and, eventually, retreat. You've shifted from being an easy mark to a liability. They can still whisper, but they can't act without consequences. And predators, above all else, avoid fights they can't guarantee they'll win. That's why the energy around you feels different now, because, in their minds, you're no longer prey. You're a risk, and a risk isn't worth touching. Number 12. The timing was divine, not coincidental. The timing of what happened last night wasn't random. It's easy to think that someone just suddenly found their courage or that circumstances simply lined up. But this was much bigger than that. Every conflict, whether personal, spiritual, or systemic, has a breaking point, a hidden line that can't be crossed without triggering collapse. Last night was that moment. It didn't happen when you were at your lowest, because at your lowest the impact would have been too small. It didn't happen when the lies were still tightly woven, because exposing them then would have been premature. It happened now because the structure built against you was at its most vulnerable. What makes this moment so striking is that everything leading up to it prepared the ground. For years you endured in silence while the opposition tightened their grip, convinced they were unbreakable. They grew bolder, more arrogant and less careful, thinking they had all the time in the world. But arrogance always creates blind spots. By the time your defender spoke up, the system of deception was already riddled with cracks. It just needed one strike at the right time to make it crumble. That's exactly what happened. This isn't about luck. Timing like this is precision. It's the moment where truth is revealed at its maximum leverage point. Before last night, the people against you could still regroup and contain the damage. After last night, containment became impossible. The audience was bigger, the lies were sloppier, the witnesses were ready. It was the perfect point for exposure to do the most damage to their plans. And here's why this matters. They thought they were in control of the timeline. They believed they could pace the attacks, dictate when and how your story came out, and decide when you'd break. But they don't control timing at the deepest level. Truth always has its own schedule, and when it arrives like a flood. Last night wasn't just a defense, it was a precision strike on a weak foundation. It hit them at the one moment where their structure couldn't withstand the weight of exposure, and now they're scrambling because nothing they do can undo that timing. Number 13. The defender unlocked silent witnesses. The power of what happened last night isn't just in the single act of defense, it's in what that act unlocked. For so long, people watched from the shadows. They saw what was happening to you, they felt the weight of the injustice, but they kept their mouths shut. Not necessarily because they didn't care, but because silence often feels safer than standing out. Fear of backlash, of losing position, of being attacked next. These things kept them pinned down. Your enemies relied on that silence. They built their power on the assumption that no one would dare to be the first to speak. But the moment one person broke the silence, everything shifted. One voice in a room changes the air for everyone else. People who've been quiet for months or years suddenly see that it's possible to speak and survive. They realize they're not alone, that the narrative they've been force-fed isn't unshakable, and that they've been complicit by staying quiet. Courage is contagious in the same way fear is contagious. When fear dominates, silence spreads. But when courage erupts, it spreads even faster, because it unlocks the part of every person that's been longing to say, enough. This is why last night will end up being far bigger than it looked in the moment. It wasn't just about the defender who stood up for you. It was about the invisible chain reaction that act created. Silent witnesses who were once content to be bystanders are now questioning themselves. Their hesitation has turned into unrest. They're weighing the cost of staying quiet against the cost of speaking. And for many, that scale is tipping. The longer they wait, the heavier their own silence feels. And that's where the real collapse begins for your enemies. Their power didn't just rely on lies, it relied on enforced silence. Without silence, their control evaporates. One person cracks it open, and suddenly the room is filled with voices they never anticipated. Last night wasn't a random act of defense. It was the trigger point, the first crack in the dam. And once the water starts rushing through, there's no stopping it. The act of one has already become the courage of many, and soon your enemies won't be facing one defender. They'll be facing an entire chorus they can't silence anymore. Number 14. What flipped wasn't favor. It was destiny. This shift you're witnessing isn't some random streak of good fortune. It's the manifestation of a deeper script unfolding. For a long time it felt like everything was stacked against you, like every door was locked, every witness muted, and every move orchestrated to corner you. Your enemies believed they were writing your ending, engineering your downfall, and setting the stage for your quiet erasure. But what they didn't account for is that some stories aren't authored by human hands alone. Some stories carry a timing and inevitability that can't be manipulated, no matter how powerful the opposition appears. What happened last night wasn't favor in the shallow sense of the word. It wasn't about someone just liking you enough to defend you. This was destiny, an appointment that was waiting to happen. Every plan to destroy you was, unknowingly, creating the perfect conditions for your vindication. The silence they weaponized became the soil where truth took root. The humiliation they thought would break you became the evidence of your endurance. And when the moment came, it wasn't a timid defense. It was a flash of prophecy, the unseen script breaking into reality. This is why it felt different. It wasn't just about protection. It was about revelation. That voice last night wasn't random or impulsive. It was perfectly timed. It was as if a hidden line had been crossed, a threshold where heaven's plan interrupted the scheme built against you. Your enemies were prepared for resistance. They weren't prepared for inevitability. Resistance they can fight. Inevitability they cannot. And here's what makes this moment so powerful. You didn't force it, and they couldn't stop it. Destiny isn't about control. It's about alignment. For years, your path was aligning with the precise point where truth would explode through every lie. That's why everything flipped so dramatically. The crowd's opinion shifted because destiny shifted the narrative. The one who spoke didn't just defend you. They fulfilled a role that was written long before the attack even began. This was never about favor in the way people think. This was the prophecy built into your survival, finally stepping into the open, and from here on, no one can pretend the script hasn't changed. What happened last night wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point that will echo far beyond the room, the argument or the accusation, every act of courage, every voice that refused silence, every shift in perception combined to create a seismic realignment of power. Your enemies, who once believed their control was absolute, discovered too late that their strongest weapon, silence, had been shattered. The person who stood up for you didn't just defend you. They exposed lies, revealed cowardice, turned witnesses into allies, and set in motion a chain reaction that destiny itself had prepared. Everything flipped because the rules of engagement changed. You are no longer an isolated target. You are a figure tied to truth, credibility, and a network of people whose courage has been unlocked by one undeniable act. The timing wasn't random, the impact wasn't accidental, and the shift wasn't merely circumstantial. It was divinely orchestrated, a pivot point written into your story long before anyone tried to silence you. What once seemed fragile, the truth, your voice, your survival, has become unstoppable. Now, the narrative belongs to you. What your enemies thought they controlled is collapsing under the weight of exposure. They may still shout, still manipulate, still try to intimidate, but their influence is fractured. Your presence, your integrity, and the courage of those who defended you have created a space where lies can no longer hold, where silence can no longer protect them, and where the truth stands unshakable. This is more than vindication. It's a declaration. The world has witnessed a shift in power, a proof that courage, alignment, and truth can overturn even the most calculated schemes. You are no longer just surviving. You are emerging as undeniable, unassailable, and unstoppable. Last night wasn't the end of the story. It was the signal that everything is changing, and nothing will ever be the same again. The stage has flipped. The tides have turned. And from this moment on, the game is no longer theirs to control. It's yours. If this resonated with you, make sure you don't miss a single moment of what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're always first to know when truth is revealed. Smash the like button if this opened your eyes. Drop a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to see it. Every action you take helps spread awareness, uncover hidden truths, and support those who refuse to stay silent. Be part of the shift. Your voice matters. God bless you.